Rodgers gets the snap. Blitz is on. Rodgers scrambles left, winds up Rainbow.
Cobb.
He's got Cobb at the 10 to the 5
Yes!
to the end zone. Touchdown and a dagger. Oh my goodness! An NFC North Division Championship dagger.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to Real Packers Talk, the podcast dedicated to everything green and gold. I'm your host, Ethan Peltier. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Real Packers Talk. I'm here today with my Week 9 preview. The Green Bay Packers will be facing off against the Lions at Ford Field in Detroit. Kickoff will be 1 p.m. Eastern Time. So I've got some thoughts that I want to jump into, so without further ado, let's get into it. If you've been following the Green Bay Packers this year or have been listening to any of my recent podcast episodes, you'll know that the Packers are in somewhat of a panic mode. They're sitting at 3-5, which is definitely not where we thought we would be at this point in the season. But, as I covered in last week's episode, not all hope is lost, at least not yet. They're going against a team that is significantly worse than they are. They're going against a 1-6 Detroit football team that, let's be honest here, they should beat. But before I just go on and on about how the Packers should win this game, I just want to talk about the narratives going into it first. The first thing I want to touch on is that I do believe that this is somewhat of a must-win game. I can't imagine how the Packers would come back from 3-6. Like, that just seems like too big of a hole. I mean, 3-5 is already a massive hill to climb over, and we'll see if they can do that, but it starts with one game, right? It starts with getting that first win out of the way, and then you can get back on track again. I think that this is the week that they need to do that. Another narrative I wanted to cover coming into this game is that historically, Matt LaFleur coached teams have not done too hot at Ford Field. Hopefully, knock on wood, that's not a trend that continues in this game, but it is something that I wanted to mention. Another thing that I wanted to touch on briefly is that Lions did recently trade away their star tight end, TJ Hawkinson, to the Vikings, I believe. Which is a move that I don't completely understand, but they will be without, a playmaker that has given us fits in the past. So that's another thing I wanted to briefly mention. Next up, I wanted to take a quick look at the injury report, and I do want to add to that we are approaching that, mid point of the season where, a lot of teams are dealing with a fair amount of injuries, and both of these lists for each team is quite long, to say the least. Starting with the Packers, both Bakhtiari and Elton Jenkins are listed as questionable. Now, they both did practice on Friday, which is a good sign, but as we know from, a couple weeks ago, even if Bakhtiari makes it through a week without any issues, there is a chance that Sunday rolls around and he's not ready to go. So, again, if you can get at least one of those guys, I feel a lot more comfortable about us potentially winning the game. If we get both, great. They are both listed as questionable, however. Allen Lazard, Christian Watson, and Preston Smith are also listed as questionable. Now, Lazard, I believe, practiced this week. He hasn't cleared concussion protocols just yet, but hopefully he can go. I think we all can understand that this offense is going to operate a lot smoother if they've got, a seasoned veteran receiver out there. And then getting Christian Watson back would be pretty big as well. I know he went down early in the Bills game, and it really did seem like they had a package, ready for him. And that's a whole chunk of your playbook that you lose when he went down. And then Preston Smith, as I mentioned, hopefully he's ready to go as well, because I've already mentioned the depth behind Preston Smith and Rashawn Gary is just not great. Obviously, we've seen some good things from Kingsley Enagbare, but I don't think that he's ready to be, fully fledged starter just yet. And then on top of that, Devondre Campbell is out this game with the knee injury, which means that Quay Walker will be calling plays, which is something to keep an eye on. Moving on over to the Detroit Lions, they've got quite a long list as well. Taylor Decker, Charles Harris, DeAndre Swift, and Brock Wright are all listed as questionable. And then Chase Lucas, Ifeatu Melifonwu, Matt Nelson, and AJ Parker all listed as out, with Josh Reynolds listed as doubtful. That's a pretty long list. Now, I do expect DeAndre Swift to be ready to go by game time, But outside of that, I can't say for sure who on this list I think would play and who wouldn't. To be completely honest, haven't really kept up with the Lions this year or their injuries per se. But the original point that I was trying to make earlier is that, yes, both teams are dealing with a plethora of injuries right now. This is the opportunity for young players to, make a name for themselves, go out there, make a play, get more playing time. I think we definitely saw that in the case of players like Samori Toure or Keyshawn Nixon or Rudy Ford. Any of these guys that get to play because of, an injury or something like that, I think this is a good opportunity for those younger players who haven't gotten a lot of playing time to polish their skills. Now, it's not ideal that you want to do that in the middle of a season, but both teams are basically in the same boat right now where they're going to have young players step up if they want their team to win. I've got plenty more to cover before I end this episode, including what I think the keys to the game are, as well as some other final thoughts. But before we do that, we are going to have a brief intermission. I will be right back after this break. Now that we're back, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the keys to the game, starting with offense. And it's very simple. Stick with what worked against Buffalo. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And what I'm referring to right now is the running game. Aaron Jones had a really great game. He went over 140 yards with an average of 7.2 yards a carry. He was all over the field. I mean, the Packers really committed to running the ball. Now, as I covered in my breakdown and analysis video last week, yes, there are reasons to believe that the Bills gave the Packers that much space to run the ball because they knew that they weren't that much of a threat anyways. But look, I really do think that this team is going to be better once they realize that their best chance of scoring is on the ground. This passing game just isn't there yet. Aaron Rodgers is not on the same page as his receivers quite yet. Now, we did see a couple of cool plays from the rookies last week as well. Hopefully they can continue to do that, and I think they'll get more opportunities to do so, but I'd argue that the running game is what's going to open up those opportunities more. And then they need to make adjustments as needed, obviously. One thing that I've been hearing a lot as far as from the coaches or from Packers fans online is a lot of teams have been sitting in what is called a too-high shell look, where they'll have two safeties basically playing deep, inviting the Packers to run the ball. Look, if a team's going to line up like that against you, pound it. If they make adjustments, you make adjustments to their adjustments, right? Like it's a game of cat and mouse. It's very much like chess, but you need to stay on top of that. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, but also if it is broke, make adjustments, right? It's pretty simple. I think they had a solid game plan last week, and I think if they do more of the same this week, they'll be fine. My worry, though, is that they're looking at this schedule and they see that the Lions don't particularly have a great defense. In fact, they have the worst defense in football right now, and they're thinking, oh, we're just going to pass it all day. I would argue that you should run the ball first and then see what happens. For the defensive key of the game, I think they have to force a couple turnovers. They're going up against the number 3 ranked offense in the league. The Lions put up just over 24 points a game. So this defense is going to have to steal a possession away. I still think our offense hasn't quite figured everything out yet. Now, hopefully they can move the ball against a pretty poor Detroit Lions defense. However, our defense is going to have to, step up to the plate and try and limit the amount of points that the Lions score. I think a couple turnovers would definitely help contribute to that. And then it also just ties into this whole idea of complementary football, right? You get complementary football when the offense and defense are playing in tandem, and you could throw special teams in there as well. But going back to my original point, I really do think that this defense can force a couple turnovers, especially against the Lions, who already have 11 turnovers on the year. So it's definitely a team that is prone to turning it over. You just have to take advantage of the opportunities that fall into your lap. Before I finish this episode, I do have a few other final thoughts, including one that I mentioned earlier, which is I do believe that this is a must-win game for the Packers. I really honestly cannot see how things can possibly get any better after losing to the Lions. So I really, really, really hope that this is the week that we pull it all together, right? Like as a fan, I hope that my team goes out there and plays against, let's be honest, a lesser opponent and get the job done. Aaron Rodgers had a quote this week saying something along the lines of, it really only takes one game, one quarter, one play, one whatever, it doesn't matter. Whatever that one moment is, that can completely change around your season. That can completely turn everything around and get you back on the right track. As I mentioned earlier, or as I guess I'm questioning now, can this be the game that the Packers do it? Hopefully. I really, really would love to see them go out there and right the ship, so to speak, get back on track, and, get this thing going again. I'm now going to jump into my final score prediction. And after a lot, I've done a lot of, soul searching and thinking. Because this team, I really don't know what to expect from this team anymore. And I don't want to spread false hope, but also don't want to look at everything super negatively. I do have hope that this team can turn things around. And I'm going to predict that tomorrow they start to get on the right track with a win on the road against Detroit. I'm picking the Packers 27-24. I really hope that this is the moment that we've needed, the one that we've been talking about, hoping for all season. But that's about everything that I had for this episode. I do want to thank you all for taking the time out of your day to listen to this podcast. I want to remind you that you can find Real Packers Talk anywhere on Anchor, Spotify, and YouTube. Please feel free to like, comment, share, subscribe, all those great things. And then, as another quick reminder, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Real Packers Talk. Feel free to hit me up with a DM. Let's talk Packers football or something like that. But yeah, thanks again for tuning in today. And I'm gonna leave y'all with a Go Pack Go. Peace.